Ukraine. Ukraine, country located in Eastern Europe, the second largest on the continent after Russia. The capital is Kyiv, located on the Dnieper River in north-central Ukraine. A fully independent Ukraine emerged only late in the 20th century, after long periods of successive domination by Poland-Lithuania, Russia, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, U.S.S.R. Ukraine had experienced a brief period of independence in 1918-20, but portions of western Ukraine were ruled by Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia in the period between the two world wars, and Ukraine thereafter became part of the Soviet Union as the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, S.S.R. When the Soviet Union began to unravel in 1990-91, the legislature of the Ukrainian S.S.R. declared sovereignty, July 16, 1990, and then outright independence, August 24, 1991, a move that was confirmed by popular approval in a plebiscite, December 1, 1991. With the dissolution of the U.S.S.R. in December 1991, Ukraine gained full independence. The country changed its official name to Ukraine, and it helped to found the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, an association of countries that were formerly republics of the Soviet Union. Land. Ukraine is bordered by Belarus to the north, Russia to the east, the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea to the south, Moldova and Romania to the southwest, and Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland to the west. In the far southeast, Ukraine is separated from Russia by the Kerch Strait, which connects the Sea of Azov to the Black Sea. Relief. Ukraine occupies the southwestern portion of the Russian Plain, East European Plain. The country consists almost entirely of level plains at an average elevation of 574 feet, 175 meters, above sea level. Mountainous areas such as the Ukrainian Carpathians and Crimean Mountains occur only on the country's borders and account for barely 5% of its area. The Ukrainian landscape nevertheless has some diversity. Its plains are broken by highlands, running in a continuous belt from northwest to southeast, as well as by lowlands. The rolling plain of the Dnieper upland, which lies between the middle reaches of the Dnieper, Dnipro, and southern Pivdeny or the Bo, rivers in west-central Ukraine, is the largest highland area. It is dissected by many river valleys, ravines, and gorges, some more than 1,000 feet, 300 meters, deep. On the west the Dnieper upland is abutted by the rugged Volyn-Podolsk upland, which rises to 1,545 feet, 471 meters, at its highest point, Mount Kamula. West of the Volyn-Podolsk upland, in extreme western Ukraine, the parallel ranges of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the most picturesque areas in the country, extend for more than 150 miles, 240 kilometers. The mountains range in height from about 2,000 feet, 600 meters, to about 6,500 feet, 2,000 meters, rising to 6,762 feet, 2,061 meters, at Mount Hoverla, the highest point in the country. The northeastern and southeastern portions of Ukraine are occupied by low uplands rarely reaching an elevation of 1,000 feet, 300 meters. Among the country's lowlands are the Pripet marshes, Polisia, which lie in the northern part of Ukraine and are crossed by numerous river valleys. In east-central Ukraine is the Dnieper lowland, which is flat in the west and gently rolling in the east. To the south, another lowland extends along the shores of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Its level surface, broken only by low rises and shallow depressions, slopes gradually toward the Black Sea. The shores of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov are characterized by narrow, sandy spits of land that jut out into the water. One of these, the Arabat Spit, is about 70 miles, 113 kilometers long but averages less than 5 miles, 8 kilometers, in width. The southern lowland continues in the Crimean Peninsula as the North Crimean lowland. The peninsula, a large protrusion into the Black Sea, is connected to the mainland by the Perekop Isthmus. The Crimean Mountains form the southern coast of the peninsula. Mount Roman Kosh, at 5,069 feet, 1,545 meters, is the mountain's highest point. Drainage. Almost all the major rivers in Ukraine flow northwest to southeast through the plains to empty into the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. The Dnieper River, with its hydroelectric dams, huge reservoirs, and many tributaries, dominates the entire central part of Ukraine. Of the total course of the Dnieper, 609 miles, 980 kilometers, are in Ukraine, making it by far the longest river in the country, of which it drains more than half. Like the Dnieper, the southern butt, with its major tributary, the Inhul, flows into the Black Sea. To the west and southwest, partly draining Ukrainian territory, the Dniestr, also flows into the Black Sea. Among its numerous tributaries, the largest in Ukraine are the Stryy and the Zbruch. The middle course of the Donets River, a tributary of the Don, flows through southeastern Ukraine and is an important source of water for the Donets Basin, Donbass. The Danube River flows along the southwestern frontier of Ukraine. Marshland, covering almost 3% of Ukraine, is found primarily in the northern river valleys and in the lower reaches of the Dnieper, Danube, and other rivers. The rivers are most important as a water supply, and for this purpose a series of canals has been built, such as the Donets Basin, the Dnieper, Kryvyyrih, and the North Crimea. Several of the larger rivers are navigable, including the Dnieper, Danube, Dniester, Pripet, Pyat, Donets, and Southern Butt, in its lower course. Dams and hydroelectric plants are situated on all the larger rivers. Ukraine has a few natural lakes, all of them small and most of them scattered over the river floodplains. One of the largest is Lake Svityaz, 11 square miles, 28 square kilometers, in area, in the northwest. Small saltwater lakes occur in the Black Sea lowland and in Crimea. Larger saline lakes occur along the coast. Known as limans, these bodies of water form at the mouths of rivers or ephemeral streams and are blocked off by sandbars from the sea. Some artificial lakes have been formed, the largest of which are reservoirs at hydroelectric dams, example, the reservoir on the Dnieper upstream from Kremenchuk. The Kakhovka, Dnieper, Dniprodzerzhinsk, Kaniv, and Kiev reservoirs make up the rest of the Dnieper cascade. Smaller reservoirs are located on the Dniester and Southern Butt rivers and on tributaries of the Donets River. Small reservoirs for water supply also are found near Kryvyyrih, Kharkiv, and other industrial cities. Three large artesian basins, the Volyn-Podilsk, the Dnieper, and the Black Sea, are exceptionally important for municipal needs and agriculture as well. Soils of Ukraine. From northwest to southeast, the soils of Ukraine may be divided into three major aggregations: a zone of sandy podzolized soils, a central belt consisting of the black, extremely fertile Ukrainian Chernozems, and a zone of chestnut and salinized soils. The podzolized soils occupy about 1/5 of the country's area, mostly in the north and northwest. These soils were formed by the extension of post-glacial forests into regions of grassy steppe. Most such soils may be farmed, although they require the addition of nutrients to obtain good harvests. The Chernozems of central Ukraine, among the most fertile soils in the world, occupy about 2/3 of the country's area. These soils may be divided into three broad groups: in the north a belt of the so-called deep Chernozems, about 5 feet, 1.5 meters, thick and rich in humus; south and east of the former, a zone of prairie, or ordinary, Chernozems, which are equally rich in humus but only about 3 feet, 1 meter, thick; and the southernmost belt, which is even thinner and has still less humus. Interspersed in various uplands and along the northern and western perimeters of the deep Chernozems are mixtures of gray forest soils and podzolized black earth soils, which together occupy much of Ukraine's remaining area. All these soils are very fertile when sufficient water is available. However, their intensive cultivation, especially on steep slopes, has led to widespread soil erosion and gullying. The smallest proportion of the soil cover consists of the chestnut soils of the southern and eastern regions. They become increasingly salinized to the south as they approach the Black Sea. Climate. Ukraine lies in a temperate climatic zone influenced by moderately warm, humid air from the Atlantic Ocean. Winters in the west are considerably milder than those in the east. In summer, on the other hand, the east often experiences higher temperatures than the west. Average annual temperatures range from about 42 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 5.5 to 7 degrees Celsius, in the north to about 52 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 11 to 13 degrees Celsius, in the south. The average temperature in January, the coldest month, is about 26 degrees Fahrenheit -3 degrees Celsius in the southwest and about 18 degrees Fahrenheit -8 degrees Celsius in the northeast. The average in July, the hottest month, is about 73 degrees Fahrenheit 23 degrees Celsius in the southeast and about 64 degrees Fahrenheit 18 degrees Celsius in the northwest. Precipitation is uneven, with 2 to 3 times as much falling in the warmer seasons as in the cold. Maximum precipitation generally occurs in June and July, while the minimum falls in February. Snow falls mainly in late November and early December. Accumulation varies in depth from a few inches in the steppe region, in the south, to several feet in the Carpathians. Western Ukraine, notably the Carpathian Mountains area, receives the highest annual precipitation, more than 47 inches, 1,200 millimeters. The lowlands along the Black Sea and in Crimea, by contrast, receive less than 16 inches, 400 millimeters annually. The remaining areas of Ukraine receive 16 to 24 inches, 400 to 600 millimeters, of precipitation. In contrast to the rest of Ukraine, the southern shore of Crimea has a warm, gentle, Mediterranean-type climate. Winters are mild and rainy, with little snow, and the average January temperature is 39 degrees Fahrenheit 4 degrees Celsius. Summers are dry and hot, with an average July temperature of 75 degrees Fahrenheit 24 degrees Celsius. Plant and animal life. Though much of Ukraine's original plant cover has been cleared for cultivation, 3 main zones of natural vegetation are still distinguishable. From north to south, they are the Polisia, woodland and marsh, the forest steppe, and the steppe. The Polisia zone lies in the northwest and north. More than 1/3 of its area, about 44,000 square miles, 114,000 square kilometers, is arable land. Nearly 1/4 of it is covered with mixed woodland, including oak, elm, birch, hornbeam, ash, maple, pine, linden, alder, poplar, willow, and beech. About 5% is peat bog, a substantial portion is marshland, and the river valleys are floodplains. The Polisia contains the southernmost portions of the Pripet marshes, and Ukraine has undertaken major efforts to drain these swamplands and reclaim the land for agriculture. The forest steppe, which covers an area of about 78,000 square miles, 202,000 square kilometers, extends south from the Polisia. About 2/3 of this agricultural region is arable land. Forests take up only about 1/8 of the area. Farther south, near the Black Sea, Sea of Azov, and Crimean Mountains, the forest steppe joins the steppe zone, which is about 89,000 square miles, 231,000 square kilometers, in area. Many of the flat, treeless plains in this region are under cultivation, although low annual precipitation and hot summers make supplemental irrigation necessary. Remnants of the natural vegetation of the steppe, including its characteristic fescue and feather grasses, are protected in nature reserves. Other natural regions are found near the borders of the country. Most of the country's rich forestlands are in the Carpathian region of western Ukraine. The lower mountain slopes are covered with mixed forests and the intermediate slopes with pine forests. These give way to alpine meadows at higher altitudes. Along the southern coast of the Crimean Peninsula, a narrow strip of land, only about 6 miles, 10 kilometers, wide, constitutes a unique natural region where both deciduous and evergreen grasses and shrubs grow. The animal life of Ukraine is diverse, with about 350 species of birds, more than 100 species of mammals, and more than 200 species of fish. The most common predators are wolves, foxes, wildcats, and martens, while hoofed animals include roe deer, wild pigs, and sometimes elk and mouflons, a species of wild sheep. The wide variety of rodents includes gophers, hamsters, jerboas, and field mice. The major bird species are black and hazel grouse, owls, gulls, and partridges, as well as many migrating birds, such as wild geese, ducks, and storks. Among the fish are pike, carp, bream, perch, sturgeons, and sterlets. Introduced and well-acclimatized wildlife includes muskrats, raccoons, beavers, nutrias, and silver foxes. Numerous nature and game reserves reflect Ukraine's commitment to the conservation of its biological heritage. The country's first nature reserve, Askanianova, began as a private wildlife refuge in 1875. Today it protects a portion of virgin steppe. Some 40 different mammals, including the onager and Przewalski's horse, have been introduced there as part of a successful program of breeding endangered species. Ostriches also have been successfully introduced. The separate sections of the Ukrainian Steppe Reserve also preserve various types of steppe. The Black Sea Nature Reserve shelters many species of waterfowl and is the only Ukrainian breeding ground of the Mediterranean gull, Larus melanocephalus. Also located on the Black Sea, the Danube Water Meadows Reserve protects the Danube River's tidewater biota. Other reserves in Ukraine preserve segments of the forest steppe woodland, the marshes and forests of the Polisia, and the mountains and rocky coast of Crimea. Environmental concerns. During the Soviet period, rapid industrialization, intensive farming, and a lack of effective pollution controls combined to seriously degrade the environment in Ukraine. Some of the most polluted areas in the world are now found there. The coal-burning industries of eastern Ukraine, which emit high levels of sulfur dioxide, hydrocarbons, and dust, have created severe air pollution throughout the region. Air quality is particularly poor in the cities of Dnipropetrovsk, Kryvyi and Zaporizhia. Lightly industrialized cities in the west, such as Uzhhorod and Khmelnytsky, face air pollution caused by the prevalence of inefficient automobiles. Major rivers, including the Dnieper, Dniester, Inhul, and Donets, are seriously polluted with chemical fertilizers and pesticides from agricultural runoff and with poorly treated or untreated sewage. Coastal water pollution in the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea has necessitated the closing of beaches and has led to a dramatic reduction in fish catches. The freshwater flow into the Sea of Azov has been largely diverted for irrigation purposes, leading to a sharp increase in salinity. The 1986 accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant created severe environmental problems in northwestern Ukraine. Vast areas of land are contaminated by dangerous short and long-lived radioactive isotopes, notably strontium-90, which can replace calcium in foods and become concentrated in bones and teeth. Contaminated agricultural lands near Chernobyl will be unsafe for thousands of years, though some of these areas continue to be occupied and farmed. Several thousand premature deaths from cancer are expected over the long term. People of Ukraine. Ethnic groups. When Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union, a policy of Russian in-migration and Ukrainian out-migration was in effect, and ethnic Ukrainians' share of the population in Ukraine declined from 77% in 1959 to 73% in 1991. But that trend reversed after the country gained independence, and, by the turn of the 21st century, ethnic Ukrainians made up more than 3/4 of the population. Russians continue to be the largest minority, though they now constitute less than 1/5 of the population. The remainder of the population includes Belarusians, Moldovans, Bulgarians, Poles, Hungarians, Romanians, Roma, Gypsies, and other groups. The Crimean Tatars, who were forcibly deported to Uzbekistan and other Central Asian republics in 1944, began returning to the Crimea in large numbers in 1989. By the early 21st century they constituted one of the largest non-Russian minority groups. In March 2014 Russia forcibly annexed Crimea, a move that was condemned by the international community, and human rights groups subsequently documented a series of repressive measures that had been taken against the Crimean Tatars by Russian authorities. Historically, Ukraine had large Jewish and Polish populations, particularly in the right bank region, west of the Dnieper River. In fact, in the late 19th century slightly more than one-fourth of the world's Jewish population, estimated at 10 million, lived in ethnic Ukrainian territory. This predominantly Yiddish-speaking population was greatly reduced by emigration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and by the devastation of the Holocaust. In the late 1980s and early 90s, large numbers of Ukraine's remaining Jews emigrated, mainly to Israel. At the turn of the 21st century, the several hundred thousand Jews left in Ukraine made up less than 1% of the Ukrainian population. Most of Ukraine's large Polish minority was resettled in Poland after World War II as part of a Soviet plan to have ethnic settlement match territorial boundaries. Fewer than 150,000 ethnic Poles remained in Ukraine at the turn of the 21st century. Languages of Ukraine. The vast majority of people in Ukraine speak Ukrainian, which is written with a form of the Cyrillic alphabet. The language, belonging with Russian and Belarusian to the East Slavic branch of the Slavic language family, is closely related to Russian but also has distinct similarities to the Polish language. Significant numbers of people in the country speak Polish, Yiddish, Rusin, Belarusian, Romanian or Moldovan, Bulgarian, Crimean Turkish, or Hungarian. Russian is the most important minority language. During the rule of Imperial Russia and under the Soviet Union, Russian was the common language of government administration and public life in Ukraine. Although Ukrainian had been afforded equal status with Russian in the decade following the Revolution of 1917, by the 1930s a concerted attempt at Russification was well underway. In 1989 Ukrainian once again became the country's official language, and its status as the sole official language was confirmed in the 1996 Ukrainian constitution. In 2012 a law was passed that granted local authorities the power to confer official status upon minority languages. Although Ukrainian was reaffirmed as the country's official language, regional administrators could elect to conduct official business in the prevailing language of the area. In Crimea, which has an autonomous status within Ukraine and where there is a Russian-speaking majority, Russian and Crimean Tatar are the official languages. In addition, primary and secondary schools using Russian as the language of instruction still prevail in the Donetsk Basin and other areas with large Russian minorities. The Ukrainian parliament moved to rescind the minority language law in February 2014, after the ouster of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych, but interim President Alexander Turchinov declined to sign the bill into law. Religion. The predominant religion in Ukraine, practiced by almost half the population, is Eastern Orthodoxy. Historically, most adherents belonged to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate, though the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate was important as well. A smaller number of Orthodox Christians belonged to the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. In January 2019 the Kiev Patriarchate and Autocephalous churches were merged into a single body as the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. In creating the new church, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I formalized the independence of Ukraine's Orthodox community, which had been under the jurisdiction of the Patriarchate of Moscow since 1686. In western Ukraine the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church prevails. Minority religions include Protestantism, Roman Catholicism, Islam, practiced primarily by the Crimean Tatars, and Judaism. More than 2/5 of Ukrainians are not religious. Settlement patterns. More than 2/3 of the population lives in urban areas. High population densities occur in southeastern and south-central Ukraine, in the highly industrialized regions of the Donetsk Basin and the Dnieper Bend, as well as in the coastal areas along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Portions of western Ukraine and the Kyiv area are also densely populated. Besides the capital, major cities in Ukraine include Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Odessa, Zaporizhia, Lviv, and Kryvyi Rih. Of the rural population, More than half is found in large villages, 1,000 to 5,000 inhabitants, and most of these people are employed in a rural economy based on farming. The highest rural population densities are found in the wide belt of forest steppe extending east-west across central Ukraine, where the extremely fertile soils and balanced climatic conditions are most favorable for agriculture. Demographic trends. Ukraine's population increased steadily throughout the Soviet era, peaking at over 50 million as the country transitioned to independence. However, a low birth rate, coupled with an aging population and low rates of migration into the country, contributed to a sharp population decline that extended into the 21st century. Millions of Ukrainians, especially those from the western part of the country, sought employment abroad, and by 2010 roughly 1 in 7 Ukrainians was residing outside the country for work purposes. These labor migrants most often sought work in Russia and the EU, and they predominantly found employment in the fields of construction and domestic service. Aware of Ukraine's net loss of workers to immigration and a fertility rate that was far below replacement level, Ukrainian policymakers recognized the burden that would be placed on the country's old age pension system. In 2011 the retirement age for men was raised from 60 to 62 and women's retirement age was raised from 55 to 60. By 2017 it was estimated that at least 1.5 million Ukrainians had been internally displaced by Russia's forcible annexation of Crimea in 2014 and by ongoing fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists in southeastern Ukraine. Economy of Ukraine. Ukraine's modern economy was developed as an integral part of the larger economy of the Soviet Union. While receiving a smaller share, 16% in the 1980s, of the Soviet Union's investment funds and producing a greater proportion of goods with a lower set price, Ukraine was able to produce a larger share of total output in the industrial, 17%, and especially the agricultural, 21%, sectors of the Soviet economy. In effect, a centrally directed transfer of wealth from Ukraine, amounting to 1/5 of its national income, helped to finance economic development in other parts of the Soviet Union, notably Russia and Kazakhstan. By the late Soviet period, however, the Ukrainian economy was under severe strain, and it contracted sharply early in the independence era. A period of extreme currency inflation in the early 1990s brought great hardship to most of the population. Despite early hopes that Ukrainian economic independence, with the concomitant end to the transfer of funds and resources to other parts of the Soviet Union, would alleviate the declining economy and standard of living, Ukraine entered a period of severe economic decline. Daily life in Ukraine became a struggle, particularly for those living on fixed incomes, as prices rose sharply. Citizens compensated in a number of ways. More than half grew their own food, workers often held 2 or 3 jobs, and many acquired basic necessities through a flourishing barter economy. By 1996 Ukraine had achieved a measure of economic stability. Inflation dropped to manageable levels, and the economy's decline slowed considerably. At the turn of the 21st century the economy finally began to grow, at least partially as a result of increased ties with Russia. In the early 21st century many young Ukrainians, particularly residents of the country's rural west, sought employment opportunities abroad. Although such migration sometimes led to localized labor shortages within Ukraine, remittances from the Ukrainian diaspora amounted to some 4% of the country's gross domestic product, GDP. The economy contracted sharply in 2014 as a result of the political crisis that toppled the government of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. Russia responded to Yanukovych's ouster by illegally annexing Crimea and fomenting an insurgency in southeastern Ukraine. A ceasefire between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed forces in February 2015 created a state of frozen conflict, and the ongoing violence shattered daily life in what had been Ukraine's most productive industrial region. Agriculture and fishing. Partly because of rich soils and a favorable climate, Ukraine's crop production is highly developed. Its output of grain and potatoes is among the highest in Europe, and it is among the world's largest producers of sugar beets and sunflower oil. Ukraine's livestock sector lags behind the crop sector, but its total output is still considerably larger than that of most other European countries. A considerable amount of the world's black soils are found in Ukraine's forest steppe zone. These soils are exceptionally well suited for the cultivation of sugar beets, an important industrial crop, and wheat. Besides wheat, almost all of it fall-sown. Ukraine produces such grains as barley, mostly for animal feed, corn, maize, for feed, leguminous grains, also feed, oats, rye, millet, buckwheat, and rice, irrigated, in Crimea. Potatoes are a major crop in the cooler regions in the north and in the Carpathian foothills. Sunflower seeds, the principal oil crop, are most common in the steppe zone, where castor beans, mustard, rape, flax, hemp, and poppy seeds also are grown for oil. In the southern steppes, especially where irrigation is used, tomatoes, peppers, and melons are grown as well. Truck farming or market gardening is particularly notable on the outskirts of such large cities as Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, and the conurbation of the Donets Basin. Fruit is grown throughout Ukraine, notably in the forest steppe, Transcarpathia, in southwestern Ukraine, and especially Crimea. Vineyards are common in the southern part of Ukraine, particularly in Transcarpathia and Crimea. Cattle and pigs are raised throughout Ukraine. Concentrations of dairy herds occur primarily in the forest steppe, especially in the vicinity of large cities, while beef cattle are more common in areas of natural pastures and hay fields, as in the Polisia and the Carpathian foothills. Sheep and goats are raised in the Carpathian Mountains and in parts of the southern steppe and Crimea. Chickens, geese, and turkeys are kept throughout Ukraine for meat and egg production, but large-scale broiler and egg-laying operations are concentrated close to the large cities. Bees are kept in all parts of Ukraine for pollination and the production of honey and wax. Silkworm raising occurs in Transcarpathia. Whereas field crop production and large-scale livestock and poultry operations were developed on collective and state farms in the Soviet period, small-scale gardening, fruit growing, and livestock raising traditionally have been carried on by private households. With the agricultural restructuring initiated by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in the late 1980s, the theretofore small private plots were allowed to expand, while collective and state farms were allowed to undergo some reorganization on the basis of group or family contract farming. Since independence, the declared intent of the Ukrainian government has been to bring about a gradual privatization of farming, but the agricultural infrastructure, which developed around collective and state farms, made the conversion difficult and costly. In December 1999, the collective farm system was abolished by presidential decree, and land reform remained a subject of concern for subsequent leaders. One of the most politically divisive aspects of privatization, however, was the proposed sale of agricultural land. The practice, prohibited by law in 1992, was seen by many as a crucial step in the liberalization of the agricultural sector. The majority of Ukraine's woodlands are managed by the State Forest Resources Agency. Although efforts to improve the country's growing stock were hampered by contamination from the Chernobyl accident of 1986, Ukraine's economically productive forested areas expanded dramatically in the years following independence and in the early 21st century. The Black Sea estuaries and the Sea of Azov are Ukraine's main fishing grounds. Among the major rivers for fishing are the Dnieper, Danube, Dniester, Southern But, and Donets. Fish catches have declined because of heavy pollution. Resources and power. Ukraine has extremely rich and complementary mineral resources in high concentrations and close proximity to each other. Rich iron ore reserves located in the vicinity of Kryvyyrih, Kremenchuk, Bilozerka, Mariupol, and Kerch form the basis of Ukraine's large iron and steel industry. One of the richest areas of manganese-bearing ores in the world is located near Nikopol. Bituminous and anthracite coal used for coke are mined in the Donets Basin. Energy for thermal power stations is obtained using the large reserves of brown coal found in the Dnieper River Basin, north of Kryvyyrih, and the bituminous coal deposits of the Lviv-Volyn Basin. The coal mines of Ukraine are among the deepest in Europe. Many of them are considered dangerous because their depth contributes to increased levels of methane. Methane-related explosions have killed numerous Ukrainian miners. Ukraine also has important deposits of titanium ore, bauxite, nepheline, a source of soda, alunite, a source of potash, and mercury, cinnabar, or mercuric sulfide, ores. A large deposit of ozokirite, a natural paraffin wax, occurs near the city of Borislav. Subcarpathia possesses potassium salt deposits, and both Subcarpathia and the Donets Basin have large deposits of rock salt. Some phosphorites as well as natural sulfur are found in Ukraine. The three major areas producing natural gas and petroleum in Ukraine are the Subcarpathian region, exploited since the late 19th early 20th century, and the Dnieprodonetsk and Crimean regions, both developed since World War II. Following World War II, the extraction of natural gas in Ukraine soared until it accounted for 1/3 of the Soviet Union's total output in the early 1960s. Natural gas production declined after 1975, however, and a similar pattern of growth and exhaustion occurred with Ukraine's petroleum, ultimately making the republic a net importer of these fuels. The exploitation of petroleum and natural gas in Ukraine necessitated the creation of an extensive pipeline transport system. One of the first natural gas pipelines in the region opened in the 1920s, linking Dasheva to Lviv and then to Kiev. As a result of the Soviet Union's commitment to major gas exporting in the late 1960s and early 70s, two trunk pipelines were laid across Ukraine to bring gas to Eastern and Western Europe from Siberia and Orenburg in Russia. Petroleum from the Dolina oil field in western Ukraine is piped some 40 miles (65 kilometers) to a refinery at Drohobych, and oil from fields in eastern Ukraine is piped to a refinery in Kremenchuk. Subsequently, larger petroleum trunk lines were added, some 700 miles, 1,100 kilometers, to supply petroleum from western Siberia to refineries at Lysychansk, Kremenchuk, Kherson, and Odessa, as well as a 420-mile, 675 kilometers segment of the Druzhba, Friendship, pipeline, which crosses western Ukraine to supply Siberian oil to other European countries. The pipelines connecting the Siberian oil and gas fields with Europe are a major economic asset for Ukraine, as their importance to Russia gives Ukraine leverage in negotiations over oil and gas imports. However, disputes between Ukraine and Russia have in the past led the latter to cut off its supply temporarily, negatively affecting Ukraine as well as the European Union, which depends on gas and oil from these pipelines. Ukraine is heavily dependent on fossil fuels and nuclear power for its energy needs. Hydroelectricity accounts for less than 10% of the country's electricity production, and the contribution of other renewable sources is negligible. Although coal production is substantial, Ukraine relies on imported oil and natural gas to satisfy its energy requirements. Thermal power stations are found in all parts of the country, though the largest are in the Donets Basin and along the Dnieper. A third electric energy producing area is in the vicinity of the Lviv-Volyn coal basin, and in the Transcarpathian region there is a group of several power stations. Nuclear power stations are located near the cities of Khmelnytsky, Rivne, and Zaporizhia, as well as along the southern But River. The severe nuclear accident at one of the Chernobyl reactors in 1986 triggered a powerful environmental movement in Ukraine and spurred the drive toward political independence from the Soviet Union. The last working reactor at Chernobyl was closed in 2000. Manufacturing. Manufacturing is an extremely important sector of the Ukrainian economy, in terms of productivity and revenue earned. Products manufactured in the country include ferrous metals, transportation equipment and other types of heavy machinery, a variety of chemicals, food products, and other goods. Ukraine has a major ferrous metals industry and ranks among the top steel producers in the world. Cast iron, rolled steel, and steel pipe are produced mainly in the Donets Basin, which is the industrial heartland of the country. The country's heavy industries produce trucks, other automobiles, railway locomotives and freight cars, seagoing vessels, hydroelectric and thermal steam and gas turbines, and electric generators. In addition, residential and industrial construction demands hoisting and transportation equipment and other machinery for the building trades. Dozens of factories, found chiefly in Kharkiv, Odessa, Lviv, and Kherson, produce a wide range of agricultural equipment as well. During the Soviet period, plants in Ukraine assembled rockets and constructed naval vessels, including aircraft carriers. Subsequently, Ukraine emerged as an arms producer in its own right, although efforts have been made since 1991 to convert defense facilities to non-military production. For instance, the U.S.S.R manufacturing concern, which once operated the world's largest missile plant, in Dnipropetrovsk, now produces civilian agricultural machinery and aerospace technology as well as strategic missile systems. The Ukrainian chemical equipment industry, accounting for 1/3 of former Soviet production, is mainly concentrated in Kyiv, Sumy, Fastiv, and Kherson. The chemical industry includes coking and the manufacture of coke products, as well as the manufacture of mineral fertilizers, sulfuric acid, synthetic fibers, caustic soda, petrochemicals, photographic chemicals, and pesticides. One of the most important products of the Ukrainian food processing industry is sugar, from sugar beets. The production of vegetable oil, mainly from sunflower seeds, is significant as well. Other processed foods include meat, grain, fruit, and dairy products. Local fish processing industries are found in the coastal cities, such as Odessa. Wine comes from the Transcarpathian region and Crimea, where the vintners of the Mossandra Group are established near Yalta. Ukraine also produces vodka, beer, and other beverages. Some of the principal products of light industry are textiles, both knitted and woven, ready-to-wear garments, and shoes. In addition, such consumer goods as television sets, refrigerators, and washing machines are produced. Machine tool and instrument manufacturing industries also have been developed. Finance of Ukraine. The National Bank of Ukraine serves as the country's central bank. It works to ensure the stability of the national currency, the hryvnia, which was introduced in 1996. A number of commercial banks provide financial services to companies and individuals, and securities are traded at Ukrainian stock exchanges. Legislation passed since independence encourages foreign investment, but complex business regulations and corruption problems have kept the level of investment relatively low. Trade. Russia remains Ukraine's most important trade partner. Ukraine also conducts a significant volume of trade with Germany, Italy, Poland, and other EU countries. Additional trade partners include China, Turkey, and the United States. From Russia, Ukraine imports petroleum products, and natural gas, as well as fabrics, footwear, printed matter, and many other products. Machinery, transportation equipment, and chemicals are both imported and exported. By sea, Ukraine exports its grain, sugar, iron ore, coal, and manganese. Services. Service industries constitute an increasingly important portion of the economy. Their value accounts for more than half of Ukraine's GDP. Among the leading service industries are those dealing with transportation and communications. Ukraine also exports certain services, particularly those related to transportation. Tourism has long been a key service industry on the southern shore of Crimea. The beautiful environment and warm climate have attracted vacationers and health seekers for more than a century. Perhaps the country's most unorthodox tourist destination was the area affected by the Chernobyl disaster. Beginning in 2011, the Ukrainian government allowed visitors to tour the abandoned city of Pripyat and the exclusion zone around the failed Unit 4 reactor. Labor and taxation. Services now employ the largest number of Ukrainian workers, though a significant number of laborers continue to work in agriculture and manufacturing. Nearly half the women are economically active. However, employer discrimination against women has been a problem. More than half of all workers belong to trade unions, many of which are grouped into large labor federations. The Ukrainian government levies corporate and individual income taxes. It also collects value-added tax and excise taxes. In an effort to simplify and improve a taxation system that had been criticized by international financial professionals as confusing and opaque, Ukrainian legislators unveiled a new unified tax code in December 2010. The new code, which was implemented in 2011, was designed to boost foreign investment, make revenue collection more efficient, and spark growth in targeted industries. Transportation and telecommunications. The flat relief of most of Ukraine presents few obstacles to transportation. Although by European standards the density of the country's hard surface road network is low, asphalt-paved highways connect all the regions and large industrial centers. The links between Kyiv and Moscow, Odessa, Kyiv, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kharkiv, Simferopol, Uzhhorod, Lviv, Rivne, Kyiv, and Kyiv, Kharkiv, Rostov-na-Donu, Russia, are highways of particular importance. The heaviest concentration of railroad trackage is in the Donets Basin and near the Dnieper River, especially its west bank. The largest railroad centers are Kharkiv, Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Bakhmut, Yasenovata, Debaltsev, Lviv, Kovel, and Kupiansk-Vuzlavy. Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov are found at Odessa, Ilychivsk, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Feodosia, Kerch, and Mariupol. River shipping is conducted primarily on the Dnieper and its tributaries, the Pripyat and Desna, on the southern But, and on the Danube, which is important in trade with other European countries. Ships on the Danube call at the port of Izmail, which is accessible to ocean-going freighters and passenger liners. Through the Dnieper-Bug Canal, in Belarus, the inland waterways of Ukraine are joined to the Vistula River basin of Poland and to the Baltic Sea. Efforts to transform the Dnieper into a continuous deep waterway have been furthered by the creation of large reservoirs at hydroelectric stations. The largest ports on the Dnieper are Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Kyiv is connected by air with all the regional centers of the country and with major cities throughout Europe and Asia, as well as with cities in North America and Australia. International airports in Ukraine include Boryspil near Kyiv and those at Kharkiv, Lviv, and Odessa. Since independence, Ukraine has worked to improve its inadequate Soviet-era telephone system. The country is now linked to international fiber optic and satellite systems. Meanwhile, cellular telephone usage has risen dramatically, and by 2010, cellular subscriptions outnumbered people in Ukraine by almost 20%. The rates of internet use and personal computer ownership lagged behind those of neighboring countries. Government and society. The government of Ukraine underwent rapid change in the early 1990s. Before its declaration of independence in 1991, Ukraine was officially called the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, S.S.R, and was part of the Soviet Union. According to the 1937 Soviet Constitution as amended in 1944, Ukraine had the right to enter into direct relations with foreign states, to conclude agreements, and to exchange diplomatic and consular representatives with them and to maintain its own military forces. The only real expression of these constitutional prerogatives in international affairs, however, was Ukraine's charter membership in the United Nations, UN, and consequently in some 70 other international organizations. The Ukrainian S.S.R. and the Belarusian S.S.R., now Belarus, were the only two UN members that were not fully sovereign countries. The revised Soviet Constitution of 1977 further limited the prerogatives of the Ukrainian S.S.R. Within days of the failed coup against Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, Ukraine proclaimed its independence on August 24, 1991, and won overwhelming popular approval for this act in a referendum on December 1, 1991. Ukraine was subsequently recognized by other governments, and many international agreements were signed, notably with neighboring countries. In addition, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia formed the Commonwealth of Independent States, which was then joined by 8 other former republics of the defunct Soviet Union. Constitutional framework. Ukraine adopted a new constitution in 1996. Until that time, the Soviet-era constitution had remained in force, albeit with numerous adjustments. The highest legislative unit of the Ukrainian government is the unicameral Verkhovna Rada, Supreme Council of Ukraine, which succeeded the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian S.S.R. Changes to electoral laws in 1997 stipulated that half of the legislative seats would be apportioned among members of the various political parties according to their relative share of the popular vote. The other half of the legislators were to be elected from single-seat constituencies by a simple majority vote. This system remained in place until 2004, when the constitution was amended to abolish the mixed legislative structure in favor of a system of proportional representation based on political party lists. The president, elected by direct popular vote for a 5-year term, is the head of state. The president acts as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, oversees executive ministries, and has the power to initiate and to veto legislation, though vetoes may be overturned. The president also chairs the National Security and Defense Council and determines its composition. The early period of Ukrainian independence was marked by a weak presidency and a strong parliament. In fact, Leonid Kravchuk, Ukraine's first democratically elected president, almost seemed to downplay his role. After his election in 1994, President Leonid Kuchma set out to redefine the structures of power in Ukraine. In 1995 the parliament agreed to the so-called Law on Power, which substantially enhanced the role of the executive branch of government, and in 1996 the new constitution gave the presidency considerably more power. A 2004 constitutional reform, which took effect in 2006, shifted some power away from the president to the prime minister, but in 2010 Ukraine's constitutional court declared that reform unconstitutional. The strong presidential powers outlined in the 1996 constitution were thus restored. Those changes were repealed in February 2014, after months of popular protest toppled the government of President Viktor Yanukovych, and the 2004 constitution was reinstated. The head of government is the prime minister, who is appointed by the president with the consent of the legislature. The president, with the consent of the prime minister, also appoints the members of the cabinet. The cabinet, headed by the prime minister, coordinates the day-to-day administration of the government and may introduce legislation to the Supreme Council. The president has the power to dismiss the prime minister and the cabinet. Local government. Ukraine is a unitary republic, not a federal state. The country is divided administratively into a number of provinces called oblasti. 2 cities, Kyiv and Sevastopol, carry the same status as an oblast. Crimea is an autonomous republic within Ukraine. In 2014 Crimea was occupied and annexed by Russia, but few countries and international organizations recognized the legality or legitimacy of the move. Justice. The highest court in the judicial system is the Supreme Court of Ukraine. The court's function is to supervise judicial activities. Constitutional matters are determined by the Constitutional Court. Political process. Citizens 18 years of age and older have the right to vote. Until 1990 the only legal political party in Ukraine was the Communist Party of Ukraine, CPU, which was a branch of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Major legislation approved by the Ukrainian Supreme Soviet originated in, or was approved by, the CPU. A change to the Ukrainian constitution in October 1990 allowed nascent political parties to be officially recognized. Subsequently, a wide array of parties emerged. Many parties, however, have lacked strong organizational bases and coherent platforms, and individual parties have tended to join together in parliament as blocs. The center-right, Nationalistic Popular Movement of Ukraine, or RUK, founded in 1989, was instrumental in the campaign for Ukrainian independence but afterward lost strength. The CPU, reformed in 1993 after a 1991 ban on the Soviet-era CPU was lifted, retained support, mainly in the industrialized and Russophone reaches of eastern Ukraine and among older voters. Several other parties, such as the Socialist Party of Ukraine and the Social Democratic Party of Ukraine, have had socialist, if not Marxist-Leninist, orientations. During the Kukma presidency, 1994 to 2005, a number of opposition parties coalesced. These parties supported the 2004 Orange Revolution, a series of mass protests that helped to bring Viktor Yushchenko to the presidency in 2005. The most important of these pro-Western Orange parties were Yushchenko's Our Ukraine, known from 2007 as Our Ukraine People's Self-Defense, and the eponymous bloc of Yulia Tymoshenko, leader of the Fatherland Party. Viktor Yanukovych, who succeeded Yushchenko as president in 2010, headed the Popular Party of Regions, which supported stronger ties to Russia. Among the parties that forced Yanukovych from power in 2014 were Fatherland, Vitaly Klitschko's Ukrainian Democratic Alliance for Reforms, U.S.S.R, and the ultranationalist Svoboda, Freedom, Party. Security. In 1991, at the time of independence, approximately 750,000 members of the Soviet armed forces were stationed within Ukraine's borders. In addition, Ukraine inherited some 5,000 strategic and tactical nuclear weapons as well as vast stores of small arms and conventional ammunition. The Ukrainian government quickly brought these forces under its command. Early in 1992, the military personnel on Ukrainian soil were required to swear an oath of allegiance to the new Ukrainian state. If they refused, they were provided with funds to leave the country. In the subsequent years, Ukraine reduced the size of its armed forces by several 100,000 troops. With assistance from Russia and the United States, the Soviet-era nuclear arsenal was decommissioned, and in 1994 Ukraine became a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Ukraine also launched what was billed as the world's largest demilitarization project, the goal of which was the destruction of more than 1 million small arms, 3 million anti-personnel mines, more than 100,000 tons of ammunition, and 1,000 shoulder-mounted surface-to-air missile systems. On paper, Ukraine's military, consisting of Army, Air Force, and Navy branches and a substantial reserve force, remains one of the largest in Europe. Traditionally, its size was maintained through conscription, with a period of military service being compulsory for men between the ages of 18 and 25. Conscription was abolished in 2013 but reintroduced the following year in response to the pro-Russian separatist movement in eastern Ukraine. Although Ukraine had a robust defense industry, much of its military manufacturing was focused on the export market, chiefly to Russia, and the equipment fielded by its armed forces was generally outdated. Budgetary neglect and corruption, particularly during the Yanukovych administration, 2010-14, hobbled the armed forces, and only about 6,000 of the country's 140,000 personnel under arms in 2014 were generally judged to be combat-ready. In March 2014 the situation was considered to be so dire that the Ministry of Defense appealed directly to the Ukrainian public for support, launching a fundraising campaign that raised $1 million in 3 days. Ukraine is a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. In the early 21st century it sought membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization but then reversed its intention. Ukraine and NATO maintained close ties, however, and Ukraine contributed troops and material to NATO-led missions in Kosovo and Afghanistan. Beginning in 2010, Ukraine also participated in maneuvers with the NATO Response Force, a multinational command that was designed to enhance the alliance's quick reaction capabilities. During the 2014 crisis in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, NATO was consistently vocal in its support for the government in Kiev, and NATO commanders offered evidence that the pro-Russian militias active in both regions were in fact Russian troops. The Crimean port of Sevastopol serves as the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. The Russian naval presence in the city dates to the Tsarist era, as it represented the realization of Russia's long-desired goal to establish a warm-water port on the Black Sea. After independence, the facilities became a source of tension between the two countries, when President Viktor Yushchenko stated that Russia's lease on the base would not be renewed. His successor, Viktor Yanukovych, however, extended the lease until 2042 in exchange for a lower price on Russian natural gas. After occupying and annexing the Crimean Peninsula, Russia voided the lease in April 2014, basing that action on its claim that Sevastopol was now Russian territory and that the lease therefore no longer applied. Authorities in Kiev bitterly disputed the claim. Health and welfare. In theory, all citizens of Ukraine are constitutionally guaranteed free and effective health care. In practice, health care is financed through a combination of state and private funding, and money for improvement in the system remains scarce. Prepaid sickness funds provide their members with some measure of insurance, but a sizable percentage of health care costs are incurred as out-of-pocket expenses. Ukraine emerged from the Soviet period with an extensive infrastructure of healthcare facilities, including hospitals, workplace, and school-based medical centers, retirement communities, and women's clinics, but these facilities deteriorated badly during the post-independence economic downturn. A lack of medicine and equipment, underfunded medical schools, and low wages for healthcare providers also have contributed to a significant decline in the quality of health care. Of particular concern was the spread of HIV/AIDS, especially among the country's intravenous drug users. Following independence, the social welfare system of the Soviet period was restructured and expanded. Benefits were partially linked to inflation, and measures were adopted to assist workers displaced by the transition to a market-oriented economy. Other components of the social insurance system include family allowances for households with children, birth and maternity benefits, and disability pay. The welfare system is financed through a payroll tax. This system came under increasing pressure as the ratio of workers to retirees narrowed in the early 21st century, and pension funding consumed an increasingly large portion of the government's budget. A small but growing percentage of Ukrainians participated in private pension funds. Housing. During the Soviet era, housing shortages were common in urban areas, and construction was often of poor quality. Ukraine's urban real estate market grew dramatically in the years following independence, only to suffer a dramatic collapse as the global economy contracted in 2008. With credit frozen, many prospective homeowners found themselves unable to obtain a mortgage. An array of non-governmental organizations and regional groups responded by sponsoring microcredit schemes that encouraged home ownership in both urban and rural areas. Education. In the 17th century, an impressive degree of literacy, for the time, could be found in Ukraine. With Ukraine's declining political fortunes, however, the rate of popular literacy dropped. By the time of the Russian Revolution of 1917, more than 70% of Ukraine's population was illiterate. The Soviets' policy of compulsory education helped to wipe out illiteracy in the younger generation, and virtually the entire adult population can now read and write. Children must attend school for 11 years. About 3/4 of the teachers are women. The student-teacher ratio is low. Since independence, the curriculum has increasingly emphasized Ukrainian history and literature. Private and religious schools, virtually non-existent in the Soviet era, began to appear in the 1990s. In addition, general and correspondence schools allow young industrial and agricultural workers to receive an education without interrupting their work. The first institution of higher learning in Ukraine, the Kyiv Academy, was established in 1615. It was an important intellectual center for the Orthodox world until its closing in 1817. Ukraine's educated classes were also well served by the establishment of universities in Kharkiv, 1805, Kiev, 1834, and Odessa, 1865, as well as Lviv, 1784, and Chernivtsi, 1875, in western Ukraine. After Ukraine's independence in 1991, those institutions became state universities, and the Mohyla Academy was re-established as a university. Today, the extensive system of higher education also includes state universities at Dnipropetrovsk, Uzhhorod, and Donetsk. The largest single scientific organization is the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Founded in 1918, when Ukraine was briefly an independent state, the Academy grew as an institution of research and learning during the Soviet period. Following Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's purges of the 1930s, The Academy's humanities and social science sections were mobilized to further the twin goals of Soviet social engineering and Russification, and they continued to follow this policy more or less until the demise of the Soviet Union. Today the Academy governs a host of research institutions and scientific workers. Among the specialized scientific facilities available in Ukraine are a number of oceanographic research vessels, based in Odessa and Sevastopol, which support research in the fields of mineral resources, marine biology, and desalinization of seawater. Elsewhere in the country can be found a large cyclotron and one of the finest experimental nuclear reactors in the world, astronomical observatories, and botanical gardens.